Hey guys. Okay, so this morning we're going to be talking about two things. One of them is Our Lady of Lourdes, which her feast day was yesterday. So that's one of the reasons we're going to be talking about her. And the second is we're going to talk a little bit about Saint Scholastica and Saint Benedict, who are two earlier saints in church history. Okay, so let's start with Our Lady of Lourdes. So Our Lady of Lourdes appeared to Saint Bernadette in the year 1858. She appears in Lourdes, France, which is in one of the regions over in France, and it basically she appears to Bernadette Soubirous, who was a young girl. She was not particularly considered extremely bright. She was not particularly considered extremely exceptional, but in any way. In fact, in many ways, she was given a lot of grief by people. One of the problems that she ran into is that her teachers, especially her religion teachers, noticed that she couldn't always remember her lessons. So, where like now we realize that people learn differently, and if you can't always remember everything, we kind of try to make exceptions. Back then it was a little bit different, and they just assumed that you weren't trying hard enough or something else was going on. So a lot of times they kind of blamed her for it. Okay, so she's going out and she's collecting firewood the one day for her family. And as she's collecting firewood for her family, she goes to this little area. And when she's there, a beautiful lady appears to her. And the lady appears to her at this place that she's collecting the firewood. And when she's collecting the firewood, then they have a conversation. And there's a couple of different things that are particularly unique about this. One of which is she uses the... okay, so this isn't going to make any sense. Maybe some of you guys will make a little bit more sense than to others, but there's different ways of saying you in other languages. So, for example, in our language, if someone is saying you, it's simply you. There's no there's no other form of that. In a lot of other languages, there's a informal way of saying you, which would be like su in French, or tu in Spanish, or in French it was, I think, vous or something like that, VOUIS. So it's like a more formal way, like you would be addressing somebody who was elder, or somebody who was in a superior position to you. The Spanish, I think, is tu is the informal, and su is the formal version. But they don't do that in all of the Spanish things. I think it's kind of more of a... Anyway, I'm kind of going off on a tangent there for a little bit. Okay, so the lady makes several visits to Bernadette. And as she's making these visits to Bernadette, she tells her several different things. One of which is that she wants her to make a... she wants her to have a... chapel built nearby. And the pastor of her church, doesn't really want to get into all this whole thing. The government wasn't very supportive. The pastor of the church didn't really want to get into the whole thing. So he says, all right, well, if your lady can make these roses appear in February, then I'll start a process to see what's going on. And lo and behold, the roses appear in February. Well, then, on top of that, a little later, and the lady appears to her 18 different times throughout this period. While she appears to her all these 18 different times throughout this period, what happens is that eventually she's told to dig in the ground and water comes up, a spring. And the water from that spring then becomes healing waters, which are the waters that we know of as the healing waters of Lourdes. Now, the healing waters of Lourdes that we have come to see there are, they don't work every time, let me put it that way. The church has pretty stringent guidelines on when it decides that something is miraculous healing and when it decides it isn't. The doctors have pretty stringent guidelines on when they will even move it to the point that the church would even start looking at it. So not every time something happens at Lourdes, it's considered a miraculous healing. But over the past years, from 1858 until now, there have been 70 occurrences in which we know that the waters of Lourdes are directly related to people having been otherwise incurably sick and then becoming better. So those are the miraculous cures that we know of that have been traced through the medical bureau at Lourdes, which traces them now. Okay, so second thing we're going to talk about real quick is Saints Benedict and Saint Scholastica. Now, Saint Benedict was one of the so like, you know how you have top 10 lists of people, like top 10 wrestlers, top 10 pop stars, top 10 whatever. Saint Benedict is definitely one of the top 10 saints. It's Saint Benedict of Nurse. I think it's Nursia, or not. It starts with an N and it ends with an A. I can never really pronounce the name all that well, but he is considered to be one of the top saints, like right up there with Saint Francis and Saint Dominic and Saint Anthony and Saint Nicholas and all Saint Joseph, even with not up there with like Saint Joseph and Mary, of course, but in the same kind of a category as like a lot of the early saints. So what he really did was he was able to establish the collective places where guys or ladies go to pray. So guys are called monks, ladies are called nuns. You guys don't really need to worry a whole lot about that. You'll learn more about them as your classes go on. However, for right now, we need to know is when he was doing it, the first group of people he went to tried to have him come in. And he comes in and he gives them all these rules. And they didn't like his rules. So they tried to poison him. And when they tried to poison him, his cup got knocked over by a bird. And then the bird kept taking all the poison food they tried to put on his plate off of his plate. So he leaves and he forms his own monastery. Well, eventually he forms what would be called a convent, which is where they put ladies, nuns, for his sister. And he would visit there once a year, and he visits his sister, Scholastica. And Scholastica knows that it's going to be the last time that she's going to see her brother, and that she's going to be going up to heaven after. And she wants her brother to spend the night that day because she misses her brother. She wants to spend the night, talk to him, just have one more time that she can talk to her brother and have him there with her that night. Well, he insists he has to go back to the monastery at Monte Cassino. And she insists that he has to stay. So the two of them go back and forth, and she says, okay, well, if you really have to go, you have to go. But then she starts praying for a bunch of rain. And the next thing you know, it rains, and it rains so much that he can't get back up to the monastery that night, so he has to stay there that night. And he goes and he looks at her and he goes, what did you do? It was kind of a sister thing to do. One of those things that a sister would do to her brother. But anyway, he ends up staying the night with her there. And 3 days after he leaves, he goes back to the after he's back at the monastery, he sees her spirit drifting up to heaven. And that covers our saints for today.